Yes, there's
Right. Then I thought, well, one good turn.
Okay, hit your button and then wait 30 seconds.
I pushed the button already.
Okay. So, bang away.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Tonight is the Finance Committee meeting prior to the City Council meeting. So I'm going to welcome you to the City of Lake Forest, October 16th, 2017 Finance Committee meeting. Will the Director of Finance take the roll?
Mayor Lansing,
Here.
Chairman Morris,
Here.
Alderman Beidler,
Here.
Alderman Rummel,
Here.
Alderman Newman,
Here.
Alderman Reisenberg,
Here.
Alderman Tack,
Here.
Alderman Moreno is absent, Alderman Bushman.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Our first order of business is the consideration of minutes from the Finance Committee meeting held on July 17th, 2017. Are there any questions?
I would move to approve.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. Motion is passed. Thank you. The next order of business is the FY 2019 mission statement and the fiscal policy for the City of Chicago, City of Lake Forest, not the City of Chicago, Lake Forest. Comments by the Finance Director?
Thank you, Chairman. This is one of the first items that we do beginning the annual budget development process. So the Finance Committee is asked to affirm the mission statement. The mission statement was included in your packet and has remained unchanged since the October 2013 meeting, as well as consider approval of the City Council fiscal policy for FY 2019. This is a comprehensive set of fiscal policies that are reviewed annually and updated that provide the framework for the development of the budget and indicates the basic fiscal policies and principles that the city uses in developing the budget, managing its finances. We've only made slight revisions to the fiscal policy for this year, one being an update of the pension funding policy section to allow for the amendment by City Council. This was first approved in summer of 2015, but based on discussions of the City Council in June and September, we anticipate bringing back a revised pension funding policy. And on page 7 of the policy, under investment policies, the City Council approved a updated investment policy in February of 2017, so that has been reflected as well. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have about those items.
Questions by the
I had just one. I didn't have a chance to really research the detail of this, but I see reference on page 3 under personnel with respect to reserves for funding post-employment benefits and so forth, that there's a self-insurance fund. And how does that function? Is that what, our deductible? I mean, how does it work?
It's our medical.
So the city's medical and dental plan is sole self-insurance. So that is the fund that accounts for transfers into that fund each year that funds out the claim payments.
Oh, that's what you call it. Okay, I didn't know that was the
Right.
formal name for that process. Okay.
So within that fund, there is a cost or a liability for other post-employment benefits, and so that reserve is just accounted for in that fund.
Okay.
Other questions from the committee?
You know, one more. On page 5, revenue guidelines, number 1, maintain a diversified and stable revenue structure to shelter the city from short-term fluctuations from any one revenue source. And then further, minimize reliance on state and/or federal revenues to fund core services. It just occurred to me, and I suppose if I dug through everything, we could figure it out, but in terms of what state monies and the occasional federal participations and projects we get, are there any core services where we're in effect relying on the state?
No,
N-
and
not
we don't
particularly, yeah.
specify the general fund revenue sources to particular services. However, the extent of state funding in the general fund would not be significant enough
Yeah.
to need to go beyond elective
Right,
services.
it's small anyway, but, right. Well, I just think it's important kind of concept to remember as the state goes through its challenges here.
Any other questions from the committee? If not, could I have a motion to approve the FY 2019 mission statement and fiscal policy?
So move.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. The third item on our agenda is the consideration of the FY 2017 Treasurers Report. Again, with the presentation by the Finance Director. Comments?
For especially those new members of the Finance Committee, the Treasurer's Report meets a statutory obligation. It is required to be done within 6 months of the fiscal year end. The more comprehensive financial statements that are audited by the independent auditor will be presented to the City Council at its first meeting in November. So this comes in advance because of the statutory deadline of October 30th. While the format of the annual Treasurer's Report is not very appealing to the eye, that is a format that is used by most municipalities to reduce publishing costs in the newspaper, because this document is published in the newspaper and would be published this week in the Lake Forester on October 19th. So because of the somewhat difficult nature of reading this report, a few years ago the Finance Committee asked us to develop an annual vendors report that's available on the website, which is vendor information for payments over $2,500 in any fiscal year. And we sort it both alphabetically by vendor and by amount. So that is a much easier report for those who might be curious about vendors that the city pays, and that is available on the website.
Questions from the committee? If there being none, could I have a motion to accept the presentation and the receipt of the 2017 Treasurers Report?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next order of business is the 2017 property tax estimate. And the Director of Finance has a more extended presentation on this.
This is only the first of many evenings that you're going to be considering the 2017 property tax levy. And as you go through this process, you will see that there are a number of statutory requirements that have to be met. Sometimes it is a bit difficult to understand how different percentages are calculated under different statutory requirements. This evening, the Finance Committee is asked to consider a recommendation regarding the first initial non-binding estimate of the 2017 tax levy. That would then come to the City Council for approval in November, on November 6th, and that is to meet the Truth in Taxation statute. And the sole purpose of that is that statutorily, a body must estimate the tax levy estimate to determine whether that initial estimate would result in an increase of 5% or more over the prior year. If that is the case, then there are additional notice requirements in the paper, and a public hearing must be held before the tax levy can be finally approved. So this is just the first step in this process, and this is, again, a non-binding estimate. So what I've done in this slide is provide two options for discussion. The first, option one, would hold the tax levy, the total city tax levy, at the tax cap, which for this year is 2.1%, for all line items but debt, the addition of new construction, and special recreation, which is not limited to the tax cap. So the first line, the aggregate levy increase under truth and taxation, is the estimate number for this evening's discussion. And then that would necessitate a public hearing if over 5%. So under option 1, that would be a 2.72% overall increase to the levy. There's also a levy under tax cap, which is calculated differently. That would be 2.01%. And the total levy, all included, would be 2.89%. So that would be the aggregate levy, the first line, plus the change in debt. So that's the addition for the total levy increase. The total dollar amount of the levy would be $30,837,408. Option 2 provides the option 1 plus the increases for fire and police pension. So the City Council held discussions in both June and September and heard presentations from the city's independent actuary on the fire and police pension. Several assumption changes were made for the actuarial evaluation dated April 30th, 2017. That was changes to mortality, changes to salary increase assumption, and a reduction of the payroll growth assumption from 5.5% to 2%. So that is added in on option 2 at the most conservative assumption, which is that the entire increase in the levy requirement, or the entire increase in the funding requirement, would be on the levy. That would be an increase of 5.34% over last year's extended levy and would necessitate the notice requirements and the public hearing. Obviously, there may be significant discussion in the coming weeks regarding how that funding will be funded, not necessarily from the tax levy. We were just presenting a worst case here. The levy under tax cap calculations would be 4.62%, and the total overall levy once debt was added would be 5.40%. That total levy would be $31,587,878. The difference between option 1 and option 2 is a little over $700,000 to give you a magnitude between the two. The last notation that I have at the bottom is that under truth and taxation, if you wanted to stay below 5% and stay at 4.99% for your estimate, that would require a reduction of $101,205 from option 2. And I just have one additional slide to just break this down, the same option 1 and 2, but this just shows the breakdown in the percentage increase. So for option 1 and option 2, it's the same increase, obviously, for the PTEL limit or tax cap, which is 2.1. Projected new construction, this is based on an estimate of values that we received from the county in September. The estimate is an increase of 0.62%. That would not be an increase on people's property tax bill. That would be taxes generated on new construction and new growth within the city's EAV. And the debt service and miscellaneous line items are an increase of 0.17%. So that's how we break down and get to the 2.89% on option 1. And then in option 2, the public safety pension requirements equate to a 2.51% increase, which is how we then get to 5.4. So again, what we would ask the Finance Committee to do is consider a recommendation that would then be brought forward as the tax levy estimate for City Council consideration on November 6th. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
We can discuss it, and then we'll come back through each member to express your opinion on that question at the end of the discussion.
So Elizabeth, the note at the bottom of the page before about the 101,000, which was 499 rather than, that was a 4.99% rather than 5.4, is that right?
The 5.34.
Oh, so the 5.34. Now, you're including that just as something to think about, or are you making a recommendation? What I guess your recommendation is always something we need
All
to hear.
I did was anticipate that the question may be, how many dollars would it take off the 534 to get below the truth and
Below the
taxation
5%.
limit?
Yeah.
And that 101,000, obviously the Pension funding requirement can be funded through the tax levy. It can be funded through an increase in the public safety pension fee, which is new this year, but has offered an additional funding source. It could also be funded or phased in with fund balance or reserves, just with the understanding that we don't know what the future holds regarding property tax levies and what the state may impose as far as limits or freezes. But at least temporarily, that increase could be offset by using reserves to fund a portion of the increased requirement.
Can you tell me if we had the public safety service or public safety pension service fee in effect for the full year, what would your estimate be of that annual revenue?
At the current thresholds, we're estimating $290,000 a year.
Okay.
And that's the $10 per quarter on residential and $35 per quarter on the non-residential.
So if we view this as this pension funding as a multi-source, we may not have to max out on this levy, on the levy side of things, right?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Right, yeah, and including potentially the use of some of our reserves to phase it in. So it's many variables to think about. We'll be talking more about this. We have a lot of tools at our disposal. There is a financial strength to Lake Forest that I think can get us to a good position. We just got to, as a group, sort of think through what's the best way to do it towards, I think, as we've discussed, sort of the goal to attack the problem, have intergenerational equity about these pension funding, but also have it fairly smooth so we don't have a lot of ups and downs in the city's finances, whether it's revenues or expenses or whatever. So it's an interesting discussion, but I'm encouraged that these tools are powerful. We have a number of different options, and there is a path through all this.
Alderman Romer?
I just had a question. When the city became, can you just go a little bit through the history of when the city became a home rule community and the ability that gave us to tax versus the being bound by the state mandated tax cap, and exactly what steps we need to go through to exceed that tax cap? Just a little history.
The city became a home rule unit by referendum, and as a home rule unit in the state of Illinois, the tax cap legislation is not subject to the city. The city is not subject to the tax cap legislation currently as a home rule unit of government. However, when the city did have the referendum and obtained home rule status, the city council at the time adopted an ordinance indicating that they would self-impose and stay within the tax cap, although they did not legally, under statutory provisions, have to do that. There was also another section related to debt service that set a debt service cap at the debt service levy at the time. The city is well below that threshold right now and is not near that debt service threshold. A few years ago, that ordinance was approved, an amendment to that ordinance was approved, setting forth certain conditions under which the city could increase the levy by more than the cap. And that would be capital requirements, pension requirements, and any loss of funding from the state. So that is the current ordinance in effect, setting forth certain conditions under which that tax cap may be exceeded.
Because my recollection at the time was that when we initially became a home rule community was that we would go to referendum if we were asking for a levy in excess of the tax cap. So now you're telling me we've carved out a few exceptions to that.
Even the initial ordinance didn't set forth the referendum requirement, I don't believe, but the current ordinance, I think it was 2013, that the ordinance was modified, setting forth the conditions. It primarily rose out of the concern of what the state budget situation could potentially do to the city's budget.
Other questions?
So Elizabeth, one of the questions I have is, next year when we're sitting sitting here at this time of year and making the same decision, what will next year look like? Where I'm going with this is, it seems to me we want to be fair to the residents of Lake Forest about what to expect going forward. And so that we're not, and I think that one of the strengths that Mayor Lansing notes about this community is that with incredible leadership on the staff level, we've been able to be mindful of circumstances that are impacting our finances. And some we know about and are anticipating, some we obviously don't at the state level. But we're going to have to keep solving this going forward. And I guess I want to have a sense of how that looks in helping our residents get used to what's next.
Well, agreed, and that's very much incorporated in that sort of encompassing remark I made, which is that I think, there's a lot of variables, but, what's the mission? The mission to me is to be fair and straightforward with residents about the financial condition of the city at all times, but also these inbound challenges we get from Springfield and how to deal with them. And so, as we've talked about before, I think some of this pension funding begs that the big issue of intergenerational equity. There's been a history in the state of just sloughing it off. And Lake Forest, I would say generally we have resisted that fairly well. But then again, they increase the benefits faster than you're funding it. And so now we're reckoning with some of that. And my view, to answer your point, I think to at least give you the guidance I have in mind for this, is let's have a comprehensive solution that we think is multi-year. I mean, decade,
that would work going
20-year
forward.
long in concept. And yes, things can change, so maybe you got to, but big part of that is to get on a plane a solution that has a fairly predictable and constant level of demand on the city's resources, so that citizens can know what to expect. We all can put up with quite a lot if we know what to expect. It's the uncertainty that drives a lot of things off the rails. So, so once we work through all these variables and come up with what makes a lot of sense, balancing a lot of issues, is that I think it should be something that's steady and predictable more or less and avoids big up and down, because that's, I think we owe that to people and to citizens, and it's doable. The other thing is it's quite doable once we figure this all out exactly.
Other questions from the committee? Alderman Bushman?
Elizabeth, in reference to option 2 and the suggestion or the sub-option there of going to below 5% to avoid this public hearing, have we ever done a public hearing, or how onerous is it to go through that extra step if you do decide to go above 4.99?
Well, in the 2012 levy, the city did that, but it was for a very different reason. The TIF on Waukegan Road was terminated. And so that was the first year that all of that value, that increment value, then returned to the tax rolls. So that comes in the first year as new construction. Strangely, under statutes in truth and taxation, new construction gets counted into that 5% level. And so that new construction put the city over 5%. And so what that required was, it's a black box notice in the newspaper. There's certain font requirements and certain format requirements under statutory provisions. Once that notice is provided in the newspaper and a public hearing date is set, and then the city council holds a public hearing to consider public input regarding the proposed levy. And then that allows them to then, the city council to then act on the ordinance.
Other questions? There's not a vote on this, but I think the director would like to have a sense of the committee, so maybe starting down with Alderman Bushman, if you'll take a minute to give any thoughts, and we'll come back around and give the director your thoughts.
Well, I think we do have to recognize the increases for fire and police pension, but I I guess I like the suggestion that's being made is we should look at other alternatives, not just put the entire amount on the levy here. And although listening to Elizabeth's description doesn't sound like it's overly onerous to go above 4.99, but I think just if we can make things simpler than they're already complicated in this world, so much the better.
Alderman Reisenberg?
I'm kind of on the fence about, I want to hear what all the options are. And I want to hear what everybody has to say and their opinion on the options.
We'll be
And then
doing
I-
that
then
in
I'll-
the coming
My sense
weeks,
is I'll be
months.
able to kind of figure this
Yeah,
out in my
right.
head, but,
There's a long way to go yet.
yeah, I need to see the menu.
Alderman Tack?
The one thing I would say about this is, and I realize this isn't a proposal, this 4.99% thing. That would bother me to no end, that we did that simply to avoid public notice and a public meeting on the issue. I'm the only one who went through that before. It wasn't that bad. Of course, it was a completely different situation too. So that may be why it wasn't bad, because nobody really cared. This time they might. I'm also not generally in favor of putting the entire pension and fire burden into the tax levy, just because I think it hides it, and I think I want to see it out front so that everybody sees it, knows what it is, and to some extent feels the pain of it, because that's the only way people are forced to participate in the process. So that's what I have to say about that.
Good. We'll come back to the mayor in a minute. You'll finish, but Alderman Newman?
Did you want to talk about the pension subcommittee at all? at
That'll
this
come
point?
later.
I'm sorry?
That's down the list on our agenda, so we'll come
Okay.
back to that.
I do think it's necessary to wrestle this beast to the ground. But as Mayor Lansing said, I think we need to do so in a way that's friendly to our budgeting process and our levy process year in and year out, well into the future. So I think we do have the tools necessary to do this. I don't believe that the burden will fall fully on the levy once we start exploring all the options that we do have. So I look at that number, 5.34, as a worst case, but I don't believe that will happen. So I think as the next few weeks unfold, we'll have better options in front of us.
Alderman Rimmel?
Well, I'm anxious to hear the subcommittee's presentation before really making any decisions on it. So I agree a little bit with Alderman Reisenberg that I'd like to hear a little bit more on the topic. I also agree with a number of the aldermen with what they have expressed about not putting the full burden in the tax levy. I think that's a mistake, but I think we have to be very transparent about what we're doing and where we're doing it, and nowhere would I suggest that we, do a 4.99 just so that we avoid a public hearing on this. I think the public needs to be informed and engaged all the way along the process and know exactly what we're doing and where this money is coming from. So that would be my statement. Thank you.
Yes, I would echo the public being informed and engaged, and I think this complex issue really deserves the most transparent and clear explanation we can give. But clearly, we're going to have a sense of all the ways we're addressing it as well. So I have such respect for staff that we will depend on your direction and certainly for the leadership of this committee. But I certainly am glad I don't have to make a decision right at this moment.
Very good. And I would just add that we have a long way to go in the discussions of what the final fund budget shall be. And we end up letting the chips fall where they may, and if it requires a hearing, like Alderman Tack said, so be it. But we have other options as well, so let's see where that takes us. Mayor Lansing, is a final comment?
Share in the consensus to continue evaluating this. Alderman Newman expressed my thoughts quite well. We have a lot of options. By no means do we have to be at this kind of worst case. Some of the things that I think could make a lot of sense for us, can be phased in over time and so forth. And, you know, even this worst case works out to about $100 in our mythical $800,000 house in Lake Forest of an increase. So it's not, you know, we're not talking big jumps here anywhere.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you. Director, are we, it's not a vote, so you have your feedback for the meeting. Moving on to the next item, I don't know if you're going to stay there and do the vehicle sticker program update?
This was also placed on the agenda to get some initial feedback from the Finance Committee so that staff could determine where to go from here. Since April 2007, the city has used its current vendor for the vehicle sticker program. The program that was implemented in 2007 was very customized. And as you know, the city prints each individual vehicle sticker individually with a license plate on it. At the time, that program was developed by the vendor with the hopes that they would be able to have that implemented in a city and be able to sell that and get more clients in the Chicago metropolitan area. Unfortunately, we are the only client of theirs and the only municipality using them for the vehicle sticker program here. So they have proposed significant increases in the costs. Those have been increasing over time, but and the current contract last year expired, and we did issue an RFP and got another proposal for the vehicle sticker program. At the time, they had some time constraints on implementation, so we opted to extend with our current vendor for one additional year, and the City Council approved that. At this time, we have had conversations with both of those vendors and an additional vendor who also does a lot of vehicle sticker programs for municipalities in the area. And we have asked them to provide a proposal as well. The savings could be significant. We're currently estimating that the first year savings could be $35,000 to $40,000. And then that would increase in subsequent years by about $15,000 because there's about $15,000 in initial setup costs the first year. But it would mean significant changes to the program. People would receive a vehicle sticker with a number on it, but it would be pre-numbered. They would all be identical, and they would be issued as people purchase vehicle stickers. That number would be identifiable to that home and that vehicle, but it wouldn't be a license plate number. There would also be changes in the online program, but both alternate vendors do offer an online program. That was one thing that we did not want to lose because we have about 70% of our vehicle stickers are sold online, which is quite high. So at this time, we just wanted to see what the Finance Committee felt about that, if they're comfortable with those changes. Obviously, there is savings potentially to be had. We would continue discussions with the two alternate vendors and bring a recommendation back to the City Council.
Thank you. Questions from the committee?
Do we, presumably it's the same kind of sticker, these higher quality stickers that don't fall apart when you're peeling them off are good. They're very important, since we're asked to do it in a very cold month of the year. Well, that's good to know it's the same. Well, it sounds like it's lower cost. The difference is whether the license plate is on there. Now, what is the preference for that? Is that allows the ticketing officer, I guess, or whomever to see whether that sticker belongs on that car in case, but the only real worry of that is whether somebody's hiking their sticker from one car to the other, which I can't imagine is.
Would be difficult.
Well,
right.
I mean, I can't imagine it's really going on.
Right.
So maybe that's not really much of a give up here, is it, really?
No, because it wouldn't be as if the stickers had no number on them. There would be an identifiable number that would relate to that household and to that vehicle. It would just take an extra step for police to determine from the vehicle sticker records what that sticker number, who that was assigned to.
Well, like we did for decades.
Yes,
Until
and what everybody else is doing around here. I mean,
Yeah, okay.
I would assume that the number would be in the police database, so if there's a reason for stopping the car or checking the vehicle sticker to confirm, he punches a number in, no different than license plates or driver's licenses, it pulls up the information that's attached to that number.
They would have access to that information, yes.
Other questions? This is not a vote, but it's just a general discussion for the benefit of the director.
Everyone's comfortable with us continuing to pursue the alternate program.
Now, 70% of the people enjoy the online purchase. I would assume, too, there's, savings to be gained by doing it online rather than through the mail and hard copy.
Right.
Elizabeth, I guess the one question I would have for you, it seems to me when I go in online to renew my stickers, the data is already still in there from the year before. I still have the same dogs and the same cars and so on. Will that will I have to start fresh this year, or will that data all still be there for a new provider?
The prior year's data will be there, as well as the data that we acquire from the state vehicle records. So
Okay.
yes, it will still
Okay.
have pre-populated information.
That's helpful.
Yes.
So, good. Okay. Sounds good.
Very good. Don't go away. The next item on our agenda is the pension subcommittee update. So Alderman Newman and I are going to share in that responsibility. We had a meeting last Wednesday with the city manager and the director and the representative from Foster & Foster, Jason Franken, who you may remember from our workshop. And Jason had gone at our request back and created a specific model for us, for Lake Forest, to model the pension obligations based on the input that we had given at the workshop. And there's about maybe 6 to 10 different variables that we have at our under our control that we could manipulate. And we spent that hour and a half trying that and trying different looks at the outcome, both in terms of how much funding we would have to do each year and what the resulting pension fund level was when we finished. And the what-if analysis was very interesting because what it showed to us is that the arbitrary 2041 100% funding level created a very difficult graph. And you can see it here on the top hand right. It sort of peaks in 2041 as sort of an Everest peak, and then it drops dramatically in 2042 because we funded to 100% and the Tier 1, Tier 2 ratio had changed, and now most of the employees are probably Tier 2 employees, which results in a tremendous drop. And so that sort of put in front of us that equity issue that the mayor has referred to, intergenerational equity issue. And Tim, maybe you want to comment a little bit on your perception of the peak in the funding?
Well, I think everybody in that meeting was on the same page that struck us as irresponsible to future generations. So the discussion turned not long after that to more of a fixed installment amortization of the liability, because I think we feel that it retains flexibility because a lot of these rules are almost certain to change in the future. The 2041 in some levels, I think at the state, is already being pushed back to 2055. And it may emerge at some point that 100% funding may not be always necessary. It could be 80 or 90 would be considered prudently close to 100% that would grant some relief to these various municipalities. So I think what we come away from is we need to up the level of commitment now to start increasing our funded ratio, but retain flexibility going into the future.
Mm-hmm. And what we determined was that if, based on Jason's recommendation, if we assumed that the pension fund was there forever, it could continue on. We didn't have to stay with the 2041 arbitrary. And you get a different perspective, and I don't have a pointer here, but on the top right is the new plan that we've been talking about. It's not finalized, but you'll see the blue line now. There's a small wedge at the beginning where we're funding at a little bit higher level than we would be obligated to under the current conditions. But then it's smoothed out and it takes a different shape, and it gets us to an 80% funding level in a reasonable amount of time, so, or 80% total fund out into the future. And so we just keep rolling it forward, and we don't assume an arbitrary end to the funding. So to the point we've talked about to date, the smoothing is particularly attractive. We do have that little wedge, and as we talked about earlier, there's a number of ways to address that, either through some property tax, maybe the reserves, maybe the surcharge for the funding of the police pension fund. Just in this next 3 or 4 years is about what it comes out to. So it's not a done deal yet. We're going to continue to work with us, and Elizabeth is going to work with us to come up with some recommendations for everyone. But this is where we're at the moment. So throw that out for questions, comments.
I think you're on the right track.
Did I recall that the state law requires a 90% funding and not 100% from prior
No, I don't think that's, is that?
Yes. Strict compliance with statute is 90% funded by 2041.
Okay.
That, we run into some issues with our audit on that, which is why the city has stayed with 100%. So there would have been some issues with GASB 68 and GASB 67 reporting for the city's audit. Communities that don't report on gap-based financial statements don't have that problem, but those of us who do have an issue on the audit side with the 90%.
Although, are you going to have that issue if you go with, the options that we're looking at here, where you are not looking for the 100%?
What we have to do each year is we have to have the actuary calculate the required funding in strict compliance with state statutes. So they do that 90% by 2041 using projected unit credit method instead of entry age normal, all those. And then what we have to do is make sure that our contribution exceeds that. As long as our contribution using other assumptions and other methodology exceeds the statutory requirement, we're fine.
But Jason felt pretty strongly that the state is going to push the 41 date continually out into the future.
Well, I was thinking, in terms of if you adjusted, pushing the date out 55 or whatever, using a 90% level, how that would look and whether that would be more advantageous.
Sure, and that's
or
something we
not.
can do with the model, and that's,
But,
we can do
I think
that.
the concepts we're talking about all make sense, of trying to have that
Right.
smoother flow out there.
Right.
And to be realistic about, as Alderman Newman said, changes are expected down the road.
Right, but we have to still, I think, our funding ratios are in the 60s, both police and fire. Which one's higher?
Fire is higher.
Right, so I think we have to be somewhat more aggressive here in the early years between now and 2041 to improve that funding ratio so that we don't create the potential for one of these Everest spikes at the end, even with rules changing. So it's a moving landscape, to be sure, but our history is fiscal conservative and not burdening future generations, and I think we need to find a balance there.
Are you suggesting like 80% then for
Right, but I
something
think,
up to 60?
I think when you look at these charts, that blue line on the above chart shows a higher contribution in these early years, and I think that that's important. So I think we need to figure out a way to fund that with our previous discussion about the tax levy and the public service fee that we imposed this year. Finding that balance to get those contributions up in the next few years to relieve pressure on the funding ratio. We haven't had a down market in quite a while, so.
I think Rob's with you on this one too, but let me ask you a question. So if you assume what you normally say about tax, which is the least amount of money at the latest possible date, and then you assumed, though, that this constant, the 55 is actually going to be rolling, the 65 and 75 and 85 in the out years, because that's probably going to be necessary because of the other municipalities that are in far worse shape than us, and they're going to have to support those. Assuming that, Tim, would you change your mind on the front-end loading?
What troubles me most about the funding ratios looking back to 2009 is we've had a doubling in the market and we really haven't gotten anywhere. And that troubles me a lot. So I think to the mayor's point about using reserves, we looked at that and it really didn't move the needle. We thought maybe more opportunistic on the reserves. If we got a down market, then maybe we look at adding some reserves to the funding.
If you had it down, if you had a down market.
If we had a 2008 type of year,
Okay. Okay.
be more opportunistic
But
about that.
I guess what you're saying is that intergenerational equity is just paying our share
Right.
over the next, over the intermediate term. And then get that curve going down to where it's kind of steady going forward with this, as the tier 2 employees become a larger proportion of the workforce. And we've kind of done it and not handed off a real problem.
As somebody who's a little older, I don't have any problem with that.
Well, but keep in mind, I think, and this is fair, would it not be, we talked about the tier 2 where that kicks in, and that was 2041. So I don't know that we really have to worry about 2055, because a lot of the tier 1 people will have rolled off by 2041. And as you see in the chart, the liability drops dramatically. We really, I think, need to manage between now and 2041. And I think we need to take a prudent approach to that and be responsible about the levels at which we fund it.
Sure. Okay.
City manager, any comments, or before we move on?
I think the important thing, and to pick up on Alderman Newman's point, is you're not going to move the needle in 1 year. And I think this is going to have to be an ongoing, very vigilant exercise that city councils and future city councils are going to have to make as things change in the state legislature and other issues that might come up, with the idea, I think, if you look at, I think, what the goals were of the subcommittee, it's, how can we create a situation that's much more level in terms of ongoing obligations into the future, so that both we're not kicking the can down the road for future generations, but also we're not taking too huge of a hit in the current generation or taxpayers to the benefit, which is what happens under these old scenarios, is once 2041 hits, basically you're 100% funded, and so your contribution drops down to just what your outlays are. And so the idea is to try and balance that out over a period of time, which would then moderate also the impact on the tax bill for the taxpayers as well. So I think, you're starting the conversation that is going to perpetuate, as Alderman Newman said, for a good 30-plus years.
Very good. And this discussion won't impact this year's levy. We're really talking about discussion carrying on and a recommendation coming for next year's levy. Okay. Thank you. Moving on to the next item, it's the 2018 core and elective service analysis, and the city manager and the director are going to comment on what their thoughts are for this.
I'll let you go first through your slides, and then I'll jump in.
Okay, as noted at the September workshop with the City Council, one recommendation was to revisit the city's core and elective service analysis this year as part of the budget process. So we put a few slides together. First was to give you a little bit of background on the original development of the core and elective service analysis, and this kind of walks you through the different major steps that occurred in 2009 and 2010. The project was initiated in January of 2009, and the definitions of core services and elective services were first developed. And then from February to August of 2009 was the data collection. So the departments worked with their city council liaison, collected data, completed worksheets in an effort to identify both the services and to begin to categorize those as core and elective. In October of 2009, there was a city council workshop to gain consensus on the process and the initial designation of services as core and elective. And then that draft listing was then released to the public, and in November and December, through different means, the public was invited to provide input on that. There was an online survey and other ways that the public could comment. And then in January through March of 2010, the public input was analyzed, and the first core and elective service analysis was finalized. Since that time, 2010 through 2017, I think every year the core and elective service analysis has been updated by departments, not changing services as core and elective, but just updating the description of those services or adding new services that had come up. And then the analysis was first incorporated as part of the budget document in fiscal year 2013. So we've actually included the document in the budget book for several years. The proposed process and timeline for review this year is to provide, as we are this evening, background information and to confirm the proposed process and timeline. Then in November of 2017, at the Finance Committee meeting budget workshop, we would discuss a core and elective scorecard. Included in your packet was the current scoring sheet we use for the capital improvement program, where proposed capital expenditures go through a scoring process to determine what priority they are inputted in for the CIP. We've considered using a similar process for evaluating the core and elective services. And at the November budget meeting would present that and discuss with the Finance Committee the actual scorecard to be used. And then in November and December after that, each department and council liaison would review the scorecards and develop proposed revisions to the core and elective service analysis. There is proposed a workshop in December. We have suggested the date of 12/18, which is the third Monday in December, when the City Council would not have a typical meeting, but to establish a workshop date at which the proposed revisions would be discussed for each department. We would propose a new public input process in early 2018 on the proposed revisions, and then in March at the second budget workshop, consider approval of the new 2018 core and elective service analysis.
The only
Questions?
comment I would make in addition to that is maybe a plea to the council that this is getting really real, really, really real. And part of the reason that we've discussed setting up this process is that we believe we need to add some structure to make the, what I believe inevitable decision is, whether it's a year from now or 3 years from now, 5 years from now, what services do we want to continue and which services are we willing to terminate? It's as simple as that, I think, from the standpoint that we got a little taste of it earlier about a relatively large increase in property taxes just for pension issues, if that was the direction we want to go. We have the same pressures on our operating expenses because, as we've discussed in the past, the operating expenses are growing at a faster rate than our operating revenues. And it's only going to get exacerbated if the state takes some actions and we need to scale further back some of our operations to provide what's required, a balanced budget. But I think to be able to make some of those hard decisions, we needed to come up with more structure and more quantifiable reasons of why keep one service versus another, because it does not matter what service you look to cut, somebody is not going to be happy. And, we've already had a little experience with that, and that wasn't even in terms of cutting a service, but it was contracting a service. And I think part of the conversation that we will have over the course of November and December is not simply also what services are we providing that we should discontinue, but what services might we be providing through a third party that we might want to discontinue. And so we need to be able to provide you with a very sort of structured, quantitative process in which we are able to make those hard decisions, not unlike what you've had to make on the capital side, because as we've experienced for a number of years, we have more capital needs than we have capital dollars. And so we really have to make tough decisions about, do we do this road or do we do this sewer? And we're going to eventually get into those tough conversations regarding ongoing operations as well. So this is really the first step, and I know that in the past, as we've looked at core and elective, we sort of dabbled it, but we really haven't had to look at them with as much, I think, seriousness as we need to going forward, because now when you really look at core and elective within each respective department, you have to say, if push comes to shove, is this a service we really can afford to continue to provide at the risk of not providing something else? So that would be the only additional comments that I would make here. And I know it's going to be a lot of work for all of you in that November, December timeframe, but I think that's the mindset we're looking for when you meet with your respective staff people, is to really sit down and understand that it isn't just all of this department is core, and we have to do everything in this department, because within all departments, we know that there are various core and elective services. And so it's really looking at the menu of services that we provide in each respective department. What are the most, or the highest priority, and what are those things that over a period of time, they were nice to do when the resources were available, but as resources become more scarce, what are we willing to give up?
I think it's very good that in terms of the timeline that's developed here, is that we'll know a lot more about this intermediate to longer term pension solution and that challenge to us. We'll also be that many more months into understanding more about the salvos to come from Springfield. The property tax freeze, it's quite interesting that it's, of course, been proposed by both parties for quite different reasons, but that gives you a pause for a community like Lake Forest and a number of others in the state that actually are very well-run communities. And, the city tax bill is the equivalent of about 7 months of lawn service for an $800,000 house in Lake Forest. I mean, it's just not a lot of money, but there's a lot of services. There's an awful lot that's bundled in there. And if a property tax freeze is put on, and we're a service organization, the city, which means most of the expenses are for people. And what about people goes up at 0% a year? Benefits, healthcare, attracting and retaining good people, which is wages and so forth. So it's a very punitive thing. And so some of this planning is to prepare for things, part of this grading of essential services. And not necessarily that everything, of course, is going to be set or changed and set in stone for many years in this coming fiscal 2019 budget process. So echoing the city manager's words, this is a very important exercise, doing the usual Lake Forest thing, which is to see the future, prepare for it in whatever its outcome.
Thank you. Questions? We'll go with Alderman Rummel first.
Well, I see that in November, we're going to discuss the core and elective scoreboard. Looking at the one that you've used in the past, which was included in our packet, I think the more quantifiable data we can get on that scoreboard, the more it's going to help us in making these decisions. So what jumped out at me is, I think it was in this presentation, is there was a cost allocation study that I believe budgeted in staff time, and the cost of that staff time, like even central City Hall staff time in administering some of these programs. In other words, allocating Bob's and Biddy's and everybody's time to these various programs, so that, there may be a program that is very takes a lot of staff time to administer, and we need to judge whether it may not be particularly money expensive, but it may be very staff intensive. So I'd really like to see, and that staff time breaks down into dollars, and it also breaks down into how many personnel do we need on our staff to administer these programs. So I think, you know, the more we can get some of that data, I'm just preparing you for what I think should be on this scoreboard, so that we can, because looking at this, I see that you did say which ones produce their own revenue and which ones, and that's important also, but I think that we can break that into other smaller portions that would start to drive us, our decisions in a direction. So that would be my comment.
Alderman Bushman?
I was going to go down the same path that Alderman Romo was saying, that obviously we need to do more than just categorize them as core and elective. And the more substance or way or scoreboards or rating systems or point systems, if we can put more into that, so that, you know, among the elective category, for example, we can, you know, break that down further to see, you know, which has the big financial impact, which has the big labor impact, what is the support, and in terms of scoring, among the input we've gotten, how important is it within the elective category? So, you know, anything you can do to help that process to break it down further, I think would be well served in ultimately coming to the conclusions that we may need to come to.
Mm-hmm. Question, Alderman Tag?
Yeah, I think that required
Alderman, I think
reading
you're
for
mute.
this, should be
His button's
book
muted, I think.
Moneyball. I don't know if anybody heard that. I think required reading for this is the book Moneyball.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what that was all about. It was
You are
taking very low income in terms of a professional sports team and grading athletes and their contributions to the organization in a very, very different way. And sometimes the very subjective assessments prove to be the least economical and have the least positive influence on outcomes. So
Very good.
maybe we just watch the movie at the meeting.
With notes on that book.
Good movie, too.
But the book was much better than the movie.
I wonder too if it wouldn't be helpful if we didn't have a monetary goal or goals going into this. I mean, we did the yellow, what was it, the yellow ball, gold ball thing, or the whatever, you know, yeah. And of course, the mayor kind of made that decision for us, as I recall. I'm kidding, Rob. But it seemed to me that having gone through that exercise, there's a dollar amount, or maybe $3 amounts for if it's A, B, or C, depending upon where we end up with the state. And there should be a monetary, and there should be that should be targeted towards that. I guess going back to the Moneyball thing, you know, we could say, well, you know, we'll get rid of one priority thing and, you know, and 5 elective things, and you find out that they don't have, I think we ought to have a goal going. And I also think we ought to things, every piece of description, so to speak, for us. You guys have, as if we're not, you know, strategic, not, we can't do your tactical job, I guess is what, I don't want to do your tactical job. I don't want to.
Correct.
Well, I think, Alderman, that's important, and Elizabeth and I have chatted about that, and just so you're clear, is that neither Elizabeth or I are big fans of cut 5% across the board. That makes no sense whatsoever. That's a cop-out, quite frankly, when you don't want to make tough decisions. And I think that part of this process is to do exactly what you're saying, is to really be able to assess what is our goal, what do we have to achieve, and then what are the tough decisions that have to be made to reach that goal. And so we will be bringing to you, I think, some critical decisions, and that's probably in March when we're talking about the budget and we get into the operational side of the budget based on the scorecard. You will see, all right, here are the things that we are suggesting based on your ranking that we will no longer continue to provide, and here is the potential savings for doing that, and going from that. Because unfortunately, you're right, we could say, well, we'll discontinue X, but either we lose revenue or we're not going to lose an employee or whatever, and so it really doesn't equate to any real dollar savings.
Good. Questions? No? All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. We have an informational
I'd just say
presentation.
one more thing, Jay. I know the staff has active minds, and they're constantly thinking of new and different ways of doing things. And I know at any point in time, there's things in the mill. At our house, we're experiencing quite a change over the last few years, where on really a volume and weight basis, 3 or 4 times more of our waste is recycled in that green bin that we roll down to the street. And the garbage is just literally the wet garbage that people used to bury in their backyards or put into their compost heap. And yet somebody comes twice a week for that and once a week for the recycle. Now, maybe we're only representative of 5 or 10% of the households, but if that's a higher percentage, I should think, I know Mike Thomas and everybody constantly thinking about all the issues there. Our people do separate and so forth. I hope this process you express urging ideas. There's a lot of evolution going.
Oh, absolutely, and I think educational, because a lot of money with my personal experience, reaching a point where it's actually almost get rid of recycling and garbage.
One should assume we lose money on recycling. It's not much, but we lose some. No, what I'm getting at is, I'm not sure I need it twice a week.
Yeah.
Why do I need it twice a week for that wet garbage, which is about 2 cubic feet,
Well, and that's, we went through that, 2 years ago, I guess, as I see Alderman
I know.
Tech knocking his head. And I think that is part of the...
But maybe most households don't really recycle that way. I mean, people are just throwing it all in the garbage, and so it has to be picked up twice a week.
Yeah. No, I think it's more, we can get into that in more detail, but we'll get you actual dollars.
That's just an example of things.
It's part of, I think, what our experience was when we looked at it is the brain damage for nominal dollars. Was it worth it versus, when we went to contract out central dispatching? That was an annual savings of over $400,000 a year.
Right.
So let's see where we can generate the biggest bang for our buck if we're going to be going through this, because, as I said, we have to prepare ourselves that there will be somebody in this community that will be unhappy with the changes that we make.
Sure. Well, you're right, and it should be for meaningful dollars. So again, that's where we need the help and understanding.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, did you have a question, comment? Do you mind if he speaks, Mr. Mayor?
We have comments in a few minutes from the public. Can we wait for that?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll wait.
Can you hold your question for a few minutes? Can you hold your question for a few minutes? We have a portion on the agenda for that.
Right. So we still have the city council meeting to go to, so we have an informational presentation by the Assistant Director Hall on OpenGov. So, efficient presentation.
Good evening. I've done a couple presentation previously on our financial transparency, and we are hoping to finally get it up and running. OpenGov is a software that the city purchased to assist with financial reporting. We upload our current city data, which is our budget and our actual expenditures and revenues, into this program. And then it's used to develop reports based on budget and actuals. Right now, we're currently using OpenGov to develop the graphs and charts that are used in the city's annual budget document. What we're working on now is we've developed a web page that's going to provide links into city current reports, which is like our actual annual report, our budget document, which is currently on the city website, and also links into OpenGov through a portal that'll go directly to these other reports. We also have on our current website additional compensation reports that are required, and these will kind of all bring all the transparency into one place. I will show the proposed webpage in just a moment, but at the top of the webpage, it confirms the city's commitment to transparency with our financial documents. And then on the lower portion of the webpage, it has some tips on how to use the webpage. It also explains government accounting, which is different from the private sector. And there's 4 links to go to these different reports. Because we are not live, so this is just a Word document of a mock-up of the web page, which will be uploaded on the city's website. So as you can see, the top portion up here is the portion that just confirms the city's transparency, that our commitment to showing our financial information. And down towards the bottom are the tips for using the portal. And here are the actual links. Other 3 links of. To the open. These different reports. The first is an act which shows as it loads. Over the security, IMRF, the general fund graph, the graph. Ones are an actual transparency graph, so these on different potential from ways that for and it shows the cost over the number of years. You know, how much does the city spend on resurfacing? And we do that out of 2 different funds, so it shows the different funding levels. And as always, these also have the expenditures at the bottom of the reports. The other report are for budgeting purposes. So these are all different graphs that are generated from our actual budget documents. On these single graphs, you can just slide this and go to previous years or keep it at the current ones, but we have done different ones on salaries and benefits, how much does public works go with all the different funds, how much does the city spend on police services. So these are and these are all based on actual city data. Wow. So I would be happy to answer any questions.
I would start by saying I'm very impressed, personally, but questions from the committee? Alderman Bushman?
Amazing amount of information, but I didn't quite understand how this website is working with the existing website of the city. Is it part of it, or are they going to be two separate ones?
This is actually through OpenGov, so it's uploaded to OpenGov, so there would be direct links on the city website. So once you click on that link, it would go straight to the
Okay,
separate
so
program.
the change you'd make in the existing website of the city is to have a link there saying for financial information, click here, and you can have all the information you ever dreamed of wanting.
Right, there's one link that goes to the actual city website for our current reports we have, and then I have the 3 different questions on what do you like to know about the city's tax levy? And we go to that first report, or to learn more about the city's actual expenditures would come to the second graph that I showed.
Thank you, Dan.
Alderman, the only thing I might add, I think for the benefit of the council, I know that we're throwing a lot at you here in a very short period of time, but either Diane or Elizabeth would be happy to meet with you one-on-one to learn more about this tool. I would encourage you, and we'll send out an email once it's live, to go online and just play around with it. And then if you need to come in for training, and the reason I encourage you to do that is because while all of this financial information is currently available on our website through the audit or through the budget and so forth, this makes it in a much more easily accessible manner than it is right now. And you may get phone calls or emails from residents saying, I was on your website and, you know, do you know how much the city council pays for trips to Hawaii or something, you know, like that? And, you know, your response might be send all financial questions to Alderman Morris, and he'll respond to everything. But I think it's going to be critical that you are as aware of this as an average resident will be, who is going to have access to all of this financial information in a much more easily accessible instrument or vehicle.
Whoopie-doo.
We wait 18 months before we go live?
And just for the record, it's 0 on the trips to Hawaii.
Thank you.
We know that number.
We appreciate that. Very good. Thank you, Diane. I appreciate it. Our last order of business is just informational, which was the flash report that the director published. Any questions, concerns on the flash report? If not, we turn to the public, and if anyone would like to ask a question or address the committee, I don't know if anyone out there would like to do that.
Young man?
Yeah, come up
Young
here,
man?
and the procedure is to state your name and tell us who you are and where you live, and then what your question is.
Hi, my name is Paul Markoff. I live at 1204 South Wilson Drive. I just have a couple comments on I don't know if this is the right place or not, but the storm sewer project in West Lake Forest. Besides my house being ground zero for this project, and the water main project a couple of years ago with all the heavy equipment and the materials and the porta potty, and that's all fine. It has taken a long time, but more importantly, I would ask this council to be active in inquiring and getting accountability on this project. It's awful. Not the process, but I've lived there for 7 years, never had water, and since this has started, we've had it now 3 times. And the one a couple months ago or a month or so ago was big, I get that. But the problem is the street is full of water. It doesn't drain. It's brand new. And the sump pumps are working. There's just nowhere for them to go. The ends of the streets are flooded. People can't get in and out of their houses because the water is over the roofs of cars. West Fork is entirely closed down. Bowling Green was flooded. I almost got stuck trying to go to Home Depot to get a pump the other day. So I would ask, I don't know who engineered this debacle, but it's terrible. And I would really ask this council to look into that and get some answers, because it looks like it's $1.4 million and it's complete waste. It's worse.
Sir, if you want to stick around, Mike Thomas is going to be making a presentation here shortly about the storm, but we can get into, I think, some particulars about the question you're raising.
That'd be great,
So,
thank you.
Yeah, the city council will come after this meeting, so we'll still be here.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay. Any other items from the public? If not,
Young man, did you want to make a comment or ask a question? You must go to
come
the
up
podium.
and tell us who you are and where you live, and
My question might have already been answered. My name is Charlie Paglini. I'm from Troop 46. I have a question about the OpenGov website. So is there a link to contact the city advisors about all the financials?
director or city manager?
On the, and Diane, you can correct me if I'm wrong, on the website will be certainly the way to access the data and the information. Once you have accessed the information, if you have questions, I don't know if they're embedded in. Contact information to be able to add something there or not in the introduction. So it's a good idea.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. That concludes our meeting agenda. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Done. Motion, meeting is adjourned. Unless you.
City council meeting will start in 5 minutes at 7:55. Thank you.
Well done.
On to the next meeting. I thought-